Hey everyone! Today we're diving into the fascinating world of the Suebi, a major Germanic tribe from the Elbe River region, which is now Germany and the Czech Republic. These people had a significant impact on European history, especially during the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the migration period. So, who were the Suebi? Initially, they were a large group of tribes, including the Marcomanni, Quadi, Hermenduri, Semnons, and Lombards. Over time, new groups like the Alemanni and Bavarians emerged. Two notable kingdoms during the migration period were simply called Suebian. The Suebi first came into the Roman spotlight during Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, thanks to the Germanic king Ariovistus. Caesar saw them as a distinct and particularly warlike group among the Germanic peoples, posing a threat to Gaul and Italy as they moved southward. During the reign of Augustus, the Romans made aggressive moves into Germania, pushing towards the Elbe. After a significant defeat in 9 BC, Meroboduus became the king of a Suebian kingdom in Bohemia. Interestingly, the Suebi didn't join Arminius' famous alliance against the Romans. In 69 AD, Suebian kings Italicus and Ceto supported Vespasian's Flavian faction. By the 2nd century AD, the Marcomanni, pressured by tribes from the north, invaded Italy under Marcus Aurelius' reign. The Suebi continued to be a force during the crisis of the 3rd century, with new groups like the Juthungi and the Alemanni wreaking havoc in Gaul and the Danube regions. By the late 4th century, the Suebi, along with other tribes like the Goths, were dealing with the Huns' disturbances. In 406 AD, led by Hermeric, they crossed the Rhine with Uhlans and Vandals, eventually establishing the kingdom of the Suebi in Galicia, Spain. The Suebi didn't just fade away. In the late stages of the Western Roman Empire, the Suebian general Ricimer was a key power player. The Lombards, another Suebian group, later settled in Italy, forming the Kingdom of the Lombards. The Suebi left a lasting legacy in regions like Suabia, Bavaria, and Thuringia in Germany. Their languages significantly influenced what we now know as High German dialects, especially in southern Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. Etymologists trace the name Suebi back to the Proto-Germanic Suebis, meaning one's own people, showing how they identified themselves. This root is shared with other names like the Suiones, Samnites, and possibly even the Slavs, indicating a broader ancient Indo-European identity. And it's important to understand that this group wasn't just a single tribe. Caesar placed them east of the Ubi, in an area now known as Hesse. Some historians think Caesar's Suebi might have been the Chadi, Hermenduri, or Semnons. Later writers used the term Suebi more broadly to cover a number of tribes in central Germany. Caesar saw the Suebi as a unified, powerful tribe within a larger alliance, whereas later authors like Tacitus, Pliny the Elder, and Strabo clarified that the Suebi didn't form a single nation. Instead, they occupied a significant portion of Germania and were divided into various distinct tribes, all generally referred to as Suebi. Even though Pliny didn't explicitly call the Chadi Suevic, he grouped them with the Suebi, Hermenduri, and Cherusci. Tacitus and Strabo made a clear distinction between the more settled Chadi and the less settled Suebi. The classification of tribes in Germania wasn't always consistent, especially for the mobile Suebi. Tacitus noted three main types of German peoples: Ermenones, Istviones, and Ingaevones. Pliny added the Bastarni and the Vandili, or Vandals, to this list. The Vandals, including tribes like the Silingi, Goths, and Burgundians, lived east of the Elbe, a region Tacitus considered Suebic. There's a possibility that the Vandals were a separate Germanic group, akin to what we now call East Germanic. Interestingly, Tacitus identified the Verini as Vandilic, while Pliny classified them as Suevic. In the 1st centuries AD, the name Suebi was applied to many Germanic tribes, almost to the extent that it seemed it would replace the term Germans. Modern terms like Elbe Germanic overlap with classical terms like Suevi and Ermenones. These terms help define the ancient tribes that spoke the dialects leading to modern Upper German dialects spoken in Austria,
Bavaria, Thuringia, Alsace, Baden-Württemberg, and parts of Switzerland. This idea was proposed by Friedrich Maurer, who defined 5 major cultural groups whose dialects developed from the 1st century BC to the 4th century AD. Back in Caesar's time, southern Germany was a mix of Celtic and Germanic tribes, increasingly pressured by Germanic groups led by the Suebi. Tacitus later described southern Germany between the Danube, the Main, and the Rhine as deserted by the departure of 2 large Celtic nations, the Helvetii and the Boii. Caesar believed that the Celtic Tectosages had once lived near the Hercynian forest, but by Tacitus' time, these peoples had mostly moved on. Strabo associated the Suebi with the Hercynian forest and described a chain of mountains north of the Danube as a lower extension of the Alps, possibly the Suebian Alps and the Bohemian forest. Strabo also mentioned the Marcomanni who, under King Merobotus, had moved into the Hercynian forest, taking over an area called Boemum. Merobotus united various tribes, including the Lugii, Zumi, Butones, Mugilones, Sibani, and the Semnons. Tacitus noted that the Quadi and the Marcomanni formed a series of powerful Suebian states along the north of the Danube. Ptolemy provided additional details, naming tribes like the Parmacampi, Udrabacampi, and Bema along the northern bank of the Danube. Jordanes mentioned that by the early 4th century, the Vandals had moved north of the Danube, with the Marcomanni to their west and the Hermunduri to their north. This period saw the Suebi and their neighbors, like the Vandals, moving into Roman territories south and east of the Danube. Caesar described the Suebi as pressing the German tribes of the Rhine, forcing them from their homes. He noted their warlike nature and described the Marcomanni as distinct from the Suebi but part of the same alliance. Strabo wrote that the Suebi excelled in power and numbers, dominating Germany between the Rhine and Elbe, except for the Rhine Valley and coastal regions north of the Rhine. Ptolemy, in his account of Greater Germany, placed the Suevi Langobardi closest to the Rhine and the Suevi Angeli extending as far north as the Middle Elbe. It has been speculated that Ptolemy might have been confused or that these positions represented a particular moment in history. In the 3rd century, a large group of Suebi, referred to as the Alemanni, moved up to the Rhine bank in modern Schwaben, previously controlled by the Romans. They competed with the Burgundians, who had arrived from further east. East of the Elbe, the Suebi continued to be a significant presence. Tacitus described the Semnons as the oldest and noblest of the Suebi, and noted their vast community. Ptolemy placed the Suevi Semnons upon the Elbe, stretching as far east as the Suvius River, likely the Oder. South of them were the Silingi, and further up the Elbe were the Calicones. To the southeast, he placed the Binocime near the modern Bohemia. Tacitus noted that the Langobardi lived in scanty numbers but were surrounded by powerful tribes. He also mentioned tribes like the Riudini, Aviones, Anglii, Verini, Eudoces, Suerini, and Newtones, who worshipped Nertha or Mother Earth. At the mouth of the Elbe, the Cauci lived to the west and the Saxons to the east. The Suebi remained a dominant force in this region, maintaining their distinct identity while influencing the surrounding tribes. And now let's delve into the cultural characteristics of the Suebi. Caesar noted that the Suebi were more focused on animal husbandry and hunting than on cultivating grain crops. They lived off their livestock and the bounty of their hunts, wearing animal skins and bathing in rivers. Their diet primarily consisted of milk and meat products, and they prohibited the consumption of wine. They engaged in trade solely to dispose of their loot, having no goods to export otherwise. Land ownership was communal, and they were not permitted to reside in one place for more than a year. They were divided into 100 cantons, each of which had to provide and support 1,000 armed men for constant warfare. Strabo also described the Suebi as highly mobile and nomadic, in contrast to the more settled and agricultural tribes like the Chatti and Cherusci. They lived in small, temporary huts and moved frequently, much like nomads, loading their household belongings onto wagons and moving wherever they deemed best. One notable characteristic of the Suebi, as described in classical sources, was their distinctive hairstyle known as the Suebian knot, which served as a badge of social rank, distinguishing freemen from slaves. Chiefs often used even more elaborate styles. Tacitus mentioned the practice of human sacrifice by the Semnons in a sacred grove, and the murder of slaves during the rites of Nerthus, practiced by the tribes of Schleswig-Holstein. The chief priest of the Naharvali tribe dressed as a woman and worshipped in groves, while the Harii fought at night. Their bodies dyed black. The Sueones owned fleets of rowing vessels with prows at both ends. Language-wise, while there is debate about whether all tribes identified by the Romans as Germanic spoke a Germanic language, it is generally agreed that the Suebi spoke one or more Germanic languages. Tacitus referred to Suebian languages, implying there was more than one by the end of the 1st century. The Suebi are particularly associated with the concept of an Elbe-Germanic group of early dialects spoken by the Ermenones, who entered Germany from the east and originated on the Baltic. These dialects, situated south of the Elbe and stretching across the Danube into the Roman Empire, eventually experienced the High German consonant shift that defines modern High German languages, and in its most extreme form, Upper German. Modern Suebian German and Alemannic German, more broadly, are therefore believed to have evolved at least partly from Suebian dialects. Bavarian, the Thuringian dialect, the Lombardic language spoken by the Lombards of Italy, and Standard High German itself are also at least partly derived from the dialects spoken by the Suebi. The only major Upper Germanic dialect that is not Suebian in origin is High Franconian German, which is on the transitional frontier with Central German, as is the neighboring Thuringian dialect. And now let's delve deeper into the cultural characteristics of the Suebi. Caesar observed that instead of focusing on grain crops, the Suebi were primarily engaged in animal husbandry and hunting. Their diet consisted mainly of milk and meat products, and they avoided wine, only engaging in trade to dispose of their plunder, with no goods to export. They wore animal skins and bathed in rivers, leading a highly mobile lifestyle without private land ownership, moving frequently and never staying in one place for more than a year. Strabo described them as nomadic, unlike the more settled tribes like the Chatti and Cherusci. They lived in temporary huts, relying on their flocks and constantly on the move with their wagons. A distinctive feature of the Suebi was their hairstyle, known as the Suebian knot, which indicated social status, with chiefs sporting even more elaborate styles. Human sacrifices were part of their religious practices. The Semnons conducted such rituals in a sacred grove, and the tribes in Schleswig-Holstein practiced rites involving the killing of slaves for the goddess Nerthus. The Naharvali tribe had a chief priest who dressed as a woman and worshipped in groves, while the Harii, known for their nighttime attacks, painted themselves black. The Sueones, another Suebian tribe, had fleets of rowing vessels with prows at both ends. Linguistically, the Suebi are generally believed to have spoken Germanic languages. Tacitus mentioned Suebian languages, suggesting a variety of dialects. These dialects, part of the Elbe-Germanic group, likely originated from the Baltic region and entered Germany from the east. Over time, these dialects, which stretched across the Danube into the Roman Empire, evolved and experienced the High German consonant shift, forming the basis of modern High German languages, especially Upper German. Modern Suebian German and Alemannic German are thought to have evolved, at least in part, from Suebian dialects. This influence extended to Bavarian, the Thuringian dialect, the Lombardic language spoken by the Lombards in Italy, and even Standard High German. This linguistic legacy underscores the lasting impact of the Suebi on the Germanic languages we recognize today. And now let's dive into the Suevian kingdom of Gallaecia and their fascinating migration story. The Suebi, under the leadership of King Hermeric, likely originated from the Alemanni, the Quadi, or both. They made their way into southern France, eventually crossing the Pyrenees and entering the Iberian Peninsula, which had slipped from imperial control following the rebellion of Gerontius and Maximus in 409.
After passing through the Basque country, the Suebi settled in the Roman province of Gallaecia, located in what we know today as Galicia, Asturias, and northern Portugal. They swore fealty to Emperor Honorius and were accepted as foederati, meaning they could govern themselves while still being allied with Rome. This made the Suebi the first of the sub-Roman kingdoms to form in the Western Roman Empire's disintegrating territory, even minting their own coins. The Suebic Kingdom in Galicia and northern Lusitania was established in 410 and lasted until 584. Although smaller than the Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy or the Visigothic Kingdom in Hispania, the Suebic Kingdom enjoyed a period of stability and even expanded militarily southwards, despite occasional conflicts with the neighboring Visigothic Kingdom. The Germanic invaders, including the Suebi, settled mainly in rural areas, contrasting with the more urbanized Hispanic population. This rural lifestyle influenced the Portuguese way of living in northern regions, characterized by small farms rather than the large estates common in southern Portugal. Bracara Augusta, modern-day Braga, became the capital of the Suebi. Historian Orosius, residing in Hispania at the time, depicted a relatively peaceful initial settlement, with the newcomers working their lands or serving as bodyguards for the locals. Another Germanic group, the Buri, settled in the region between the rivers Cavado and Omaim in what is now known as Terros de Boro, Portugal. The Suebi quickly adopted the local language, leaving few traces of their Germanic tongue except for some words in personal and land names. In Galicia, several parishes and villages still bear names derived from old Suebic settlements. In 416, the Visigoths were sent by Emperor Honorius to fight the Germanic invaders in Hispania. After defeating the Alans and the Silingi Vandals, they were resettled as foederati in Aquitania. This allowed the Asdingi Vandals and later the Suebi to expand south and east. After the Vandals left for Africa in 420, Roman authority was briefly reasserted in the peninsula, except in the northwest where the Suebi remained. During its peak, Suebic Galaecia extended as far south as Merida and Seville, the capitals of the Roman provinces of Lusitania and Baetica. Their expeditions reached Saragossa and Yeda after capturing Merida in 439. In 438, King Hermeric, tired of fighting, ratified peace with the local Gallaeci and abdicated in favor of his son Richila. Richila proved to be a formidable general, defeating Roman military leaders Antivotus and Vitus. Richila's son, Ricaire, converted to Roman Catholicism around 447 and married a daughter of the Gothic king Theodoric I. Ricaire launched attacks on Tarraconense, a still Roman province. However, his campaigns eventually led to conflict with the Visigoths. In 456, a large army of Roman federates, including Visigoths and Burgundians, defeated the Suebi near modern-day Astorga. Ricaire was captured and executed by his brother-in-law, the Visigothic king Theodoric II. In 459, the Roman Emperor Majorian briefly restored Roman rule in northern Hispania after defeating the Suebi. However, after Majorian's assassination 2 years later, the Suebi were free from Roman control. The Suebic kingdom, confined to Gallaecia and northern Lusitania, experienced political division and civil war. Eventually, Remismund was recognized as the sole king, fostering a friendship with the Visigoths and converting his people to Arianism. In the kingdom's final years, King Ariamir called the First Council of Braga in 561 to address the Priscillianism heresy. In 569, King Theodomir called the First Council of Lugo to increase the number of dioceses within his kingdom. These acts have been preserved through a medieval summary known as Pericule Suevorum or Divisio Theodomiri. The kingdom's end came when the Visigothic king Leovigild attacked the Suebi in 570. After several invasions, the Suebi made peace with Leovigild in 525. However, King Miro later supported the rebellion of the Catholic Gothic prince Hermenegild and was defeated by Leovigild. Miro's son, Eboric, confirmed the friendship with Leovigild, but was deposed by his brother-in-law Odeca.
This gave Leovigild an excuse to attack, and in 585, the Suebic kingdom was incorporated into the Visigothic one. Despite this defeat, the Suebi retained their properties and freedom, continuing to live in Gallaecia and eventually merging with the local population during the early Middle Ages.